Well, joining me now from Bedfordshire is the Conservative candidate, Nadine Dorries, and here with me in the studio, Matthew Taylor, the former Chief of Political Strategy for Tony Blair, now at the RSA. Welcome to you both. Tony Blair's intervention, is it helpful to the Labour cause?
I think it probably is. You know, if you don't like Blair, and a lot of people don't, this won't make a difference. And if you don't rate Miliband, this probably won't make a difference. But there are a lot of people who are wavering. And what Tony Blair has done today is he's touched two chords. First of all, he's helped in relation to the kind of leadership issue. It's not so much that people necessarily think that Tony Blair admires Ed Miliband, but at least Ed Miliband has managed to persuade Tony Blair to make this speech. But more importantly, he has brought this issue of Europe back to the forefront. And the thing about Tony is that he has this self-assurance. It's not just that he thinks he's right, which has often been a weakness of his in the past, but not just that he thinks he's right, but also he thinks that any sensible person would agree with him. And that is interesting because Labour's tried to get this issue onto the agenda and failed, but I suspect Tony Blair will have succeeded where Labour has failed.
I mean, Nadine Dorries, as a Conservative candidate and a Eurosceptic, are you pleased that he's raised this issue?
Well, of course I'm pleased, but I think it's quite revealing that he's raised it today. I mean, Ed Miliband has done all but deride New Labour, which was Tony Blair's project, and there has been no synergy between the two men at all. I think what it demonstrates today is almost a desperation, and I think Tony Blair has waded in today, finally, to help out the Labour Party and to throw them a line. Because when Ed Miliband said in the leader debates that, you know, he let people know very clearly that he was not going to give the people a choice, there was almost a national collective sigh of disappointment. Because when he said it, he almost said, I don't trust people, we're very pompous, we know what's best. And I don't think that, I think the polls have shown that's not gotten down terribly well. And I think Tony Blair today has been like a knight dressed in Armani on a charger and has ridden in to save Ed Miliband from his own downfall and to try and put faith back in the Labour project and in the campaign, because it really needs something, because they're not doing very well.
Well, of course, Matthew Taylor, Nigel Farage has welcomed this and congratulated Tony Blair, as he sees it, for putting Europe back on the agenda, because he thinks it will play well to Eurosceptics and indeed to anti-Europeans like UKIP.
No, I wouldn't often say this about political speeches because most of them are unreadable and unwatchable, but this is a speech that is worth reading in the sense that what Nadine says about the difference between Tony Blair and Ed Miliband is true, and this is not a speech in which Tony Blair implies that he's a great supporter of the Miliband programme as a whole. He's very careful about what he says. But what this speech is about is something which Tony Blair himself clearly feels very, very strongly about, and he believes very strongly that a referendum is a bad idea, that it will lead to chaos. He talks a lot in the speech about Scotland, and he talks about the fact that once you let, as he uses his phrase, the nationalist genie out of the bottle. What's interesting in Scotland is that since the referendum, support for Scottish independence has gone up, even though the price of oil has halved and an independent Scottish economy would now be bankrupt. But the point he makes is that once you start this debate, you can't be sure where it's going to end. And for a week, we thought Britain was going to break up. So he feels very strongly about this. It's wrong, I think, to think this is a ringing endorsement of Ed Miliband and his policies. He's very clear not to say anything in the speech today that would be ridiculous.
But of course, Nadine Dorries, there are those, Tim Montgomery, the Conservative writer, is one of them, who said tonight that there's a lot of suspicion that really Tony Blair is trying to get his own back for Labour, for the Conservatives talking up the SNP by talking up UKIP at the Conservatives' expense.
I'm sure there's an element of truth in that. You know, what Tony Blair has done tonight in his statement, I mean, he is a catastrophist. I mean, the fact that there would be chaos if the UK left the EU, it's just blatant nonsense. And I think what he's trying to do is almost scaremonger around that issue and frighten people. You know, those people who are employed within the EU, the people who employ them are not suddenly going to not employ them the next day should we leave. It is all blatant nonsense. And I think, you know, I think Tim's absolutely right. I think there is an element of getting us back. But, you know, it is an election. Things like that are going to happen. There's going to be more of it. But I do think people should look at what Tony Blair has said today through the right filter. It isn't a case of coming out and backing Ed Miliband, because he doesn't. It is a case of being scared that Conservatives are going to win because it's looking very good for us. And Tony Blair has always been a huge architect of the whole European project. He would see all his work disappearing if there were a referendum given to the people. And, you know, it isn't David Cameron who's going to decide, and it shouldn't be Ed Miliband. The British public should have a say.
Okay. So do you think there's a bit of mischief in this? Trying to bring UKIP more into the election campaign?
I don't know what the motives behind the speech are, but I think sometimes you just have to take something at face value. I would encourage people to read the speech. It's not a very long speech. It is a speech by somebody who feels very passionately, not necessarily passionate about Ed Miliband, not necessarily passionate about Labour.
It was out of date reading the speech compared to the pap we've been getting from the party leaders this time.
You know, Nadine, you know, with all due respect, she disagrees with it entirely, believes that Britain leaving the European Union is vital for our country. It's a massive decision. Tony Blair, as a global figure, has alerted us to the fact that we're on the verge of making a massive decision, and that, I think, is a good thing to do, because it would be wrong for us to wander into a decision with major ramifications without thinking about it.
Thank you both very much indeed for joining me.